A warm welcome to everybody, whether you are returning and have hung out with us for most of our 30 plus versions of Friday morning, or whether you're brand new, and a special welcome to everybody this morning. Wherever you are, and we know now, thank you, Tim, that we have people from the East Coast right the way over to the island this morning as well. And so if you're not in Canada, thank you for taking a moment with us. It's important to all of us here in Canada to take a moment just to recognize, acknowledge, and appreciate the land where we are this morning. So whatever you choose to do on Friday the 13th, whether it's living, learning, laughing, hopefully having some fun, we'll just take a moment to acknowledge. For us, the three of us are all based here in Calgary, and Calgary and Sate are situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Today, that encompasses the Indigenous people of the Treaty 7 region, the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis homeland. State also acknowledges all the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. Thank you again for taking a minute to acknowledge for all of us. This is a traditional land and a place where we all walk in the footprints of the Métis people. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Jenny. As always, so very well done. And yes, so this morning is the first of a new series of conversations for us. Many of you have joined us before, and we've been speaking about the intelligences of leadership and various leadership topics. Today we have somebody with us who, you know, as he might say, he just gets it. That we thought we would bring in somebody who actually demonstrates and leads beyond his title and any title. So in our very first leadership journey conversation, you know, I'm really pleased to have a guest with us today who has inspired me over the past couple of years. He's a gentleman who demonstrates genuine curiosity in everything that he takes on, and you can see that and hear that more specifically in his two podcasts, They Just Get It and Collisions YYC. If you haven't listened to either, please do. Especially the 5 episodes with Jenny. So I think those are absolutely fantastic. He's the CEO of Clear Motive Marketing. This is an organization that has landed the accounts, the likes of Honda, and one that had to reinvent their approach through the pandemic, as many of us did. And on top of that, he's able to lead on the ground and in the air, as I do believe he's a licensed pilot. So Tyler Chisholm, thank you for joining us this morning and welcome.
Correct. Thank you. What a warm introduction. Am I blushing a little bit? Am I a little bit? That was a fantastic introduction. Thank you. It's a pleasure. And I'm not sure how I feel about now you putting me, because I've had both of you multiple times on the other side of the microphone. So we'll see how this pans out, but it's an absolute pleasure to be part of your first episode to kick off the year. I love the work both of you do and the entire organization behind you and all you do to make us all better leaders and active participants in the corporate worlds and just being better humans. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Excellent. So are we. So yes, we get to turn the tables and ask you some questions. And for anybody with us in the audience today, if you want to pose specific questions, please do pop them in the Q&A. I will keep an eye out and we will pose those as they fit into the conversation. But Tyler, we want to start this series of conversations asking the same question to every guest that joins us. And that is, what does leading beyond any title mean to you?
Such a fantastic question. I was so curious about it myself, actually, that I opened up Chat GPT-3 last night as I was about to go to bed and typed it in. And it was an interesting exercise because I was like, oh, well, there's my answer. So I need to maybe switch it up a bit. So I used it as a way to inspire beyond what does it mean? And what it doesn't mean is hierarchy. What it doesn't mean is command and control. What it doesn't mean is a title or a placard on your desk or on your door. And it means the ability to take that ownership as an individual. But I took it a little bit further and thought in my mind of like, any time that you see an opportunity to make something bigger than you could by yourself, that, wow, this is a great mission. This is an objective. This is a purpose that I'm excited about, but I can't do this alone. And then that next move, which is truly leading beyond any title, is how do you empower, engage, support, and bring people around you to accomplish that goal that maybe was your inspiration, but bringing people together in a way that isn't about your title to accomplish something bigger than you could by yourself. That to me is truly leading beyond any title.
Wow.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we don't need ChatGPT for this. We might need it for other stuff. I'm not negating it, but not for this. That was awesome.
I let it challenge me to come up with something bigger, because I'd like to think I wouldn't have said the answer that it gave, but it was factually correct. It just didn't have any soul. So it pushed me to think a little bit more. So there, it served its purpose to drive me to be more human in my answers. So I thank it for that. But I'm on the fence with you, Jenny. To be excited about, but with a considered eye on that one.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Jenny, I thought you were going to say that was such a good answer. We could just end right there, but that's
that was my first thought. Like, honestly, where do we go now?
Was that my mic drop? Is that my mic drop moment?
Yeah.
There is. Oh, go ahead, Craig.
I was going to say, there's a few things that you touched on in there, Tyler, that I just jotted down. Ownership was a huge word I heard that I want to touch on. Empowerment, building something bigger than you by yourself, I think is how you worded it. Mm-hmm. And then inspire, I also wrote down this whole concept of me as leaders inspiring others is an interesting one.
Yes, it is.
Right. But
if I only knew every single word was going to come back to me.
The thing I'm interested in is that you were curious enough to go jump into ChatGPT, and I know that's part of who you are, but as we were thinking about today, you'd raised the concept of curiosity in leadership. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious how that has played a role in your journey.
Thank you, Craig, for pulling on that thread a little bit. There's lots of little threads apparently and nuggets. There's the whole rest of our conversation unpacking those words I used. But curiosity, I would say, is something that's, I would say, relatively new to me from the concept of the role in leadership. As an individual, I've always been quote unquote curious, but I would say was very selfish curiosity. And I don't say that in a negative way of, I want to learn more and I want to dive into this and I love all these topics. And my nightstand has books that, from history to, self-improvement to fiction all over the place. But through starting the podcast, and this was some work with my business coach. So first piece of advice that I'll share, my sage wisdom, if you're in any type of a role in any organization, especially in any type of leadership management, we'll just use leadership maybe ubiquitously as a term, have a coach, have someone in your life to give you some outside perspective around that. So as I started the podcast, I had some severe imposter syndrome before I got going. And who am I to have this conversation with all of these people that know what they do so much better than me? I said, well, if I'm curious and I'm there to steward the conversation, that's okay. And that gives me permission to do that. But that was still very much curiosity, self-curiosity. And over the past couple of years, I've realized that curiosity, even as an additive strategy. So to have a true conversation, I can be curious and just ask a bunch of questions. I would argue that doesn't make for a good podcast episode. It also turns me into a 4-year-old. Why? How? Why? How? Versus the opportunity to add and to contribute, but always in a way to elevate and lift up that other person in the conversation. In the case of the podcast, it's 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 or 3. But from that perspective, and I said, and my business coach started challenging me. I said, I'm just really curious. She goes, well, I listened to your podcast. You do something more than that. She goes, I would argue that actually is a key factor or, a character trait of a solid leader, where you're asking to elevate, not just asking to position yourself as the person with the answers. And like curiosity for the sake of it, I think is table stakes, but to take it beyond that and add it as a factor that builds up the people in the room, your team. And the word inspire is a bit tricky, but how am I leaving someone walking away going, I never thought about that way. I'm going to take that a little bit farther. Not, geez, I guess Tyler has all the answers again, which maybe was me, of a younger version of me as a leader, thought that was actually leadership.
I really like that in terms of, when you spoke beforehand too, like our old form, what leading beyond any title is not. The job of the leader was to have all the answers. And now we can't have all the answers. And we can lean into GPT if we want to, but there was a really important piece you said there. It doesn't have the soul. And the 3 words that you took that sort of joined those dots for me was empower, engage, and support. And so I love that notion that as a leader, we can ask questions, good questions. There's a piece in there too, like how do we get to that good question? In fact, here's my question for you. How do you get to that good question that actually does elevate and empower the person, the human standing in front of you? Because I think engagement comes at the other end of that. I think that's a natural byproduct once you have that interest.
I could agree more. I think everything in life starts with intention. Is your intention to demonstrate that you know more? Sometimes,
Yeah.
and this is something I've been fooling around with, don't weaponize curiosity. And there was a period of time, and I like softeners, and I like setting, like, oh, I'm curious, or I wonder, or what would that be like? And those are great ways to launch into a question without going, why did you do that? Ooh, instantly, that doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
But my team also bugs me, like especially my operations manager, when I'm like, Kara, I'm curious. She'll be like, oh no, Tyler's curious. Uh-oh, what's coming now? So you got to be careful with it. You got to be careful. Don't turn it into a weapon. But if my intention is to actually add or contribute or get into a dialogue where I already don't think or have somehow, when someone asks you a question, but they already have the answer in their head and they're like, okay, all right, with your Socratic method, just tell me what you wanted me to do. And it's kind of resentful and annoying. Where my opportunity and what I've been working on, this is always a journey. This is never baked. This is in process. Is like, hey, I'm curious. I actually thought about it this way. How does that relate to what you think, or where do you think we could build on that? Very different intention if I'm walking alongside that person and developing out that idea. And ultimately, I still believe we need to push towards an outcome. And sometimes the leader goes, I know what the outcomes are. I can't get there by myself. I maybe think I know, but to your point, Jenny, we live in a very complex world. That idea of knowing all the answers and all the variables is actually kind of ridiculous. But if my intention is, I'm going to ask you questions to get you to the answer I want you to get to, that's where the credibility starts to fall apart in the curiosity train of questioning. So intent of elevating and adding, not just getting you to where I want you to be. It's a tricky balance in business because we often do that because the illusion of saving time and making it faster leaves people getting run over in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, you touch on something there. I think that a lot of leaders perhaps struggle with, like, and we've talked about this on the show before, is that every leader has a pressure to deliver what they have to deliver, right? And how do you help or guide your team to that when you see a path versus trying to not pull them down that path, right? They may go a different direction to get there, but how do you balance? And I'm curious, how do you balance? How have you balanced that, right? And what mistakes have you made along that way that have helped?
Well, we don't have enough time for that. We don't have enough time for that podcast, Greg.
Like what has helped form the way you approach it now?
Oh, so well, I think learning the hard way that my way wasn't always the best way, for starters, and actually being able to admit that and sit in it and sit in your mess that you create. I think it's a George Patton quote, like, tell people what you want them to do and be surprised on how they do it. I butchered that, but definitely if they're more, so often I've in my mind, and I think a little bit of self-reflection, having a coach, getting feedback, self-awareness is at the root of all this as a leader. If you're going through the world like a freight train or like a wrecking ball, and we all know those leaders, maybe we've been that leader. Maybe we've certainly, if we've had that person in our life, we immediately know who they are. The hippo, the highest paid person's opinion, who speaks louder and stands at the head of the table and prophesizes. And even if they're wrong, they'll just blame someone or not admit it. That's an extreme version. But the other side of it of going, I did think I was going to, sometimes you have to experiment and be okay with that, and be okay with, like, I think I know the answer. And that was one of the 360 that I got about 4 or 5 years ago. You don't let it get to the end, Tyler, because your brain jumps forward and you say what you think it's going to be, and it makes us all feel shut down and devalued. So I said, okay, that's pretty. And it was the circle had enough sides. I was like, okay, this is pretty consistent feedback. So sitting in it and waiting and resisting. And I at the time chalked it up to being self-indulgent. Oh, I like jumping to the end. I like moving quick. That's my speed, but that's not everyone else's speed around me. So am I meeting them where they are, or am I forcing them to be where I'm at? As a leader, I think that's a balance. You've got to give that up sometimes. And guess what? I started to see ways of doing things that weren't my idea that actually worked out pretty good. So the proof points and the data started to show up, but it was because I got feedback that I was kind of killing that process just to indulge in the way I wanted to do it. And I wanted to lead and how quick I wanted to jump to the end. I wasn't allowing creativity, curiosity. I wasn't curious. I was just curious how we were going to get to what I thought was the right answer. That's not curiosity and what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, I struggle with that as well. Right.
I appreciate
finding the line to the end. How do I fix it and move on? Right. And so
I was reading a Harvard Business Review article, and they said, I think 3,000, I love good HBR quotes, 3,000 people interviewed, 70% felt that they did not have the ability or the latitude or permission to be curious at work.
Interesting.
That's a pretty powerful number. That's so 30%. Like
Sweet.
if you flip that around, like this is a challenge, mainly because a lot of organizations perceive it as inefficient. It's taking too long. Let's just get to the end because we're
Yeah.
under such extreme pressure.
That's so fascinating. So it begs the question for me. Were you naturally curious, or did you have to learn how to be curious? And as a leader, can you teach your team how to be curious, or do they just have it or not have it?
I believe there's different layers. Again, I'm going to throw another stat just because I think it's a big number. From 3 to 5 years old, we asked on average 40,000 questions. So the average child can easily, they said up to 200 to 300 a day can be a 4-year-old, but on average it's about 70 to 80. And a typical adult will only ask about 20 questions on average a day. So it's over 50%, which part of it is just your learning in your brain, and there's some neurology to that. But if you look at curiosity, or that, I believe it can be trained. I believe it can be deliberate. I've always been curious, but it was always, I would say, selfish curiosity. And the word selfish is funny because it has a negative connotation to it. I wanted to learn because I wanted to learn. I wanted to feel that I knew more things, and I was curious, and I wanted to explore experiences. My curiosity in others, and then my curiosity in others to actually help elevate that situation. That's something that's come for me. And I would say since doing the podcast, that is one of the best leadership exercises I've ever undertaken, was be in an environment when I am never the hero ever. It's always the guest. And as a leader, I would argue that if you're making yourself the hero at all, you're squashing some of these things. Back to that, who's the hero of the story? If it's you, somebody's not the hero, and that could be really discouraging to them.
I think that there's like that's huge. There's a couple of things in there. Meeting people where they're at. And, with that race to, you called it an indulgence. I love that. It's a new word. Yeah, it was my indulgence. I want to be at the end. I want to be done. What do you mean you're not with me? So where are they at? And that's an interesting cadence too, when we're working remote. Like I know your company in the transition over the last couple of years during the pandemic has switched to full remote. So that's got to be a different cadence within there. So I'm curious how, as a leader, how do you ensure you stay at the different levels? Because you need a CEO leadership level. I've gone back to your company now, not the podcast, but you also need a leadership level too with your people around you. Do you have is there an intentional way that you do that?
It's a work in progress. If I'm going to be, I'd love to have the perfectly baked answer, but that wouldn't be honest. For us, the pandemic, I would say it was a positive in a lot of ways from a culture, because we had 2 offices and we had this office versus that office. We had a little bit of those things going on. So the first thing that COVID did, put us all on a level playing field. We all have the same screens. We all have the same microphones. We all have the same everything. And it's been a journey. At the beginning, I think there was some disconnection. There was a little bit of triage, like, the bullets were flying. It was the first 6 months of COVID. Fast decisions were being made. We were circling as a leadership team and often just letting the rest of the company know what was going on. So was that what I'm talking about here? No, but I do believe it was time appropriate and situational appropriate. So I think everything does have an asterisk on it. In that case, I would say I was on the verge of being disengaged as a leader before COVID. COVID came and all of a sudden, like, whoa, okay, like literally the bullets are coming in. We need to figure this out. I got really engaged and really focused really quickly. My personality really enjoyed that. It allowed me to be me in a setting where that actually was what was required, but it wasn't a sustainable strategy. So I would say that culturally we had some breakdown in year 2, and had a lot of people that are like, well, I don't like remote and I want the office and I'm disconnected, and the drama kind of amplified. And so we said, all right, what is our culture? Let's start with a foundational thing. So we said, all right, our culture at Clearmotive is to make it easy, ... Make it easy for our employees to be done at 5. Make it easy for our employees to access any file that they need. Make it easy for our employees to communicate with each other, know what they're accountable to, live their lives, whatever that may be, whether it be one of my team has a 1-year-old. She didn't go on mat leave because she was able to do both. So we started to really make it an employee-centric culture, which brought everything down and leveled things out from an inclusive perspective. We also got a lot more transparent with our goal setting and our visioning and including them in it and allowing their goals to also be aligned with our goals. So there was a lot of very tactical elements that came, but through COVID, we became more people-centric, even though we feel like we're more disconnected. Or the argument, you could be not in the same office, so therefore, how can you have a culture? My experience is I disagree. You just have to be you have to be just as deliberate at it. It's just a different series of levers to pull, but it's still a bunch of humans feeling part of something or not part of something fundamentally. So I said a
And we're
lot
very,
there with maybe not giving you a
yeah.
concrete answer, but it's still it's a journey and we're still on it.
But what was really cool there, and I think this is a good sort of join the dot piece, is that curiosity of what is our culture. Like all too quickly, the culture gets slapped up on the wall or the culture is pushed downwards. But there's that, there's so many different levels and layers of curiosity, whichever way you look at it. What is our culture? And when it's your people that answer that question, what is our culture, that intention setting becomes huge. And so now we are on a level where we're at, and that sort of, you flatten the hierarchy, but you keep the title. And it's sort of, I think it does this during the day as we play that role of leader and then play that role of leadership as we're on that flat level too. I love that.
One of my biggest pet peeves when someone says, well, I got some feedback, but I don't want to step on any toes. That probably irks me the most. I'm like, well, is your intention to step on toes? Well, no. I said, well, then you're not. But there's that still that ingrained DNA of, I don't want to step on. I'm like, well, say what you say, and I'll let you know if it stepped on my toes. I'm like, okay, just, it didn't. So next time you can worry about that. But we bring our own stories as individuals. We bring past organizational experiences, human experiences, our lives, how we grew up. You can't have a flat culture of collaboration and anyone being able to share anything and have a step on your toes. Because as you and I have talked about many times, that sounds a lot like low psychological safety to me.
Yeah, for sure. Do you ask for feedback regularly from your people?
Yes, we do. Absolutely. I do coffee chats. So I personally, as a leader, I used to go to Toronto on a regular basis. I'd literally go to coffee with different team members in the office. So my office manager challenged me about a year and a half ago. She goes, you can do that virtually still, And I was like, oh, you're right, Julie. That's an excellent piece of feedback. Yeah, we have a very active coaching. We don't really sit on the once a year you get a performance review. And no, it's an ongoing basis. This year, one of the things we're really doubling down on is investing in education and support and bringing some real options forward for our team. Like, how do we ultimately drive better business outcomes through empowering our people, while allowing them to feel like they're contributing more through education and what they're passionate about. So I would say we're even on a journey to become even more employee centric around the fact of what are we doing to empower them as individuals, knowing that even without drawing a straight line, it will allow us to drive better outcomes for our clients.
Empowerment's an interesting one for me, and I'm glad you went there. So I'm curious to know what is that. And every time I hear the word curious right now, I'm just chuckling. But
if I infected you with it or just got it on your radar, that's a win. We're already a good session for today.
Yeah, exactly. What does that mean to you? Like, lots of organizations talk about, we're going to empower our people. Yeah. To Jenny's earlier comment, does that mean it's just one of our values that's on the placard on the wall? Or what is true empowerment?
I hope not. I have issues with words on a wall, but anyways.
Exactly. But what does true empowerment look like in your organization? Or what do you think it should look like in an organization? What do you think people in your organization believe that to mean?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, I'll have to ask them because I will never be so bold to think that I know what they mean. But for me, it still involves the individual. I can't empower someone. I want to be really clear. I don't think I don't believe I can really inspire someone either. That's very tricky. But can I remove the friction that allows them to rise up into a space that's maybe a little bit above where they are, but that it's also part of their choice? I can't go, you're going to learn this. Don't you feel empowered? That doesn't sound like empowerment. But providing that networks, that support, whether it's time, whether it's financial, whether it's giving permission, I think that it's creating an opportunity. Removing friction to me is so critical because so much of we feel disempowered because, did it really take an hour to download that file? Like, I look at all the little things that break that person from like, wow, I did my best work today because I got to do what I had to do, and all the silly things and the stupid stuff that got in the way, what removed. To me, that's foundational. It's like, we're going to put in a foosball table and call it a good culture. It's like, well, no, if your team is stressed out and never getting work done, but you point to a foosball table and call it, we're fun. Allow them to do what they do in their role. And I'm okay. And over COVID, I want people to live their best life. Work is just a very small part of it, where I think a lot of times as organizations over the years, the work and everything was so focused on that being the most important thing. Often it's not, and that's okay. And I think for COVID, that brought that attention for a lot. So that empowerment for me is removing friction and barriers inside the organization to allow that individual to feel that they can rise up without a whole bunch of stuff binding them down, but also creating a space where their life is, and it's okay that it's more important than their job. And I think for a lot of times as leaders, we sometimes mix that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and there was a comment. I think the statistic is, through the course of an average individual's life, you only spend about 15% of your hours working, right? We just condense it all into one short period of our life, right? So to your point, yeah, your job's not more important than your life, your health, your family, your friends. Like it's what you do. It's not necessarily who you are.
It's
right?
part of the puzzle. And if that for a lot of people is where they feel the most stress or the least amount of joy, let's just play on that one for a second, then it will pull down all the rest, and vice versa. Like there is a balance, and it can play a big role. And maybe different than life, there's KPIs and measurements and reports and career growth and expectations society puts on you. There's a lot of noise that goes into work. But allowing that individual to potentially rise above some of that, or any way you can from an organizational perspective, I don't just mean as a leader, but removing that friction to give them that little bit of bandwidth to step into something bigger than themselves, which you can find through good questioning and good coaching, not, or mentorship, or, getting them involved with someone who gives them allowing them to see a bigger potential. To me, that's empowerment more than any other tactic that you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm getting way philosophical out here. I'm getting way out on a limb here.
It's interesting though, because there's I'm forgetting who it was, but looking at, some people have abandoned the whole performance review. You mentioned yourself, you're not so keen on that once a year piece. It's much more of a cadence of conversation. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions was, what brings you joy at work? Like, when do we ever stop and say, what is it that brings you joy at work? And then take a look at how much of that do we get in a day? And nobody's suggesting that should be 100% of the day. There's a few of us who have, pretty cool jobs that brings us a lot of joy, but do we get some in the day? And I think that's an interesting perspective. We can achieve it in all different places. And that in itself is an empowerment, because if you're doing something that you love, you're naturally more engaged, more inspired. And to your point, you can't inspire or empower, like engage other people. That comes from them. And that depends.
That's intrinsic, not
yeah.
The benefit of the promise of reward or lack of punishment. That doesn't work that well with empowerment and inspiration and things like that. I like what you said though, of like, I think sometimes there is a bit of a, the social media version of like, you should have passion all the time and love everything. I don't think that's realistic as well. And I think a lot of times we look at our day and it went pretty good, but that 3 things that didn't go well. And, we didn't use the right filters on our social media at lunch, so someone else's meal looked better. Like that world we have of comparison can really rob us of a lot of joy. And I think this illusion that some of the things you do at work are going to be kind of shitty. Like, it's okay. You got to do the task. You got to get through it. Yes. I often believe there's got to be a better way, but sometimes you just I grew up on a farm. Sometimes you got to move the pile of rocks from here to there, because that's what your dad said you needed to do. And there was no easy way around it. We have stuff like that in our work that maybe isn't the most joyful in the world, and, find joy in the moment, and we're going to get a little more Zen on it. But like you said, if it's the majority of the time, some of the other stuff is, there is sometimes a cost to ride the ride, and sometimes it's doing the things that aren't awesome. That's okay.
Oh, absolutely.
So what you're saying is you didn't adopt all the rocks as pet rocks and name them before you moved them to the.
No, I should have, because there probably was like if I was more entrepreneurial at that age, I could have turned that into, I would have been much more motivated by the financial means. Just the $2 an hour, I think I got paid to picking rocks was my first job on the farm, and I got $2 an hour. But the upside was when you got to drive the tractor. That's when it turned into a whole nother thing.
There you go. You said something earlier I want to come back to. And I didn't think we were going to go here today, but it's an interesting concept around leadership in my mind. And you mentioned prior to COVID, you were starting to feel disengaged as a leader. I think that's how you said it.
I was.
And so I'm wondering if we can dive into that a little bit, as much as you're comfortable doing so, because I think leaders have this expectation, or this myth about leaders, that they're always engaged, always driving, always, they're the leader. They're the one that's supposed to be out there empowering and inspiring and helping folks develop ownership, all those great things you said at the start. But leaders are people too. So
are you saying that we're messy humans as well, Craig? Is that what are we going to admit this on there?
Yes, we are. We are messy humans.
And some of the pre-questions you sent me about that I was looking at around, what are some of the key characteristics, and that level of self-awareness, the level of humility, the level of, hey, yeah, it's not always going to be perfect and shiny, kind of talking about that. I definitely was in that place a little bit before COVID. I didn't love my own culture. And I say my own, I don't own it, but the culture that, when you look at, as a leader, you look at your own team or your own organization, you're like, I'm not loving going to work right now. That can happen. And you're right. There's a bit of shame in that, I would say, of like, oh, geez, well, if you don't, why did you let it be this way then? Because you're the leader. And that comes back to the omnipotent leader, which is also part of the myth. And looking back on, I think there was a series of factors. I also believe life goes in cycles, and growing and age and change, and geez, you start shooting on yourself. Geez, I should be here, I should be there. The company should be like this. Don't shoot all over yourself. My second piece of advice for today. But then all of a sudden, COVID was, whoa, you have my undivided attention. Anyone who knows me knows why I love. I don't want to say high adrenaline sports, but snowboarding, motorcycle racing, I'll say, because it demands presence. It brings me into the moment. I don't get to run away with, it should be like this. It should be. No, I need to be where I am right now to survive in this moment. COVID did that to me from a leadership perspective, but it also kind of gave me a break state that, okay, as I started to come back to it and I had a few more cycles open up that wasn't survival anymore, I said, all right, let's be deliberate about this in a different way. So I feel very fortunate that the left hook of COVID came. And again, I know a lot of people had a really bad time. I choose to find the silver lining because that's also who I am. But, all the things contributing, I definitely was in a shitty place beforehand. And, not really in life, but in work. And it's such a good example. Everything in my life is great from the perspective of lots of joy over here, but something wasn't right. COVID gave me a shakeup, which was, I would call a pattern interrupt or a break state, where I got to kind of indulge in this rapid fire leadership style that I enjoy, not sustainable over the long term. Like the turnaround CEO usually isn't the growth CEO, or there's all those different flavors of leaders that come out there for different times. Coming back to it with a change of a view of the world through COVID, through doing, thinking about humanity in a different way, was allowed myself and my business partner. Like this is not a me story. I want to be really careful with that. I have a whole leadership team that was fantastic through COVID and is still there today as we move this forward. It gave us enough of a break to get out of the pattern and the repetition that wasn't working for us. But you kind of get caught up in the busy sometimes and don't take the break. COVID provided that. So as we came back to it, we were able to be a lot more deliberate because we all knew what we didn't want and we talked about it openly. So I didn't keep it locked up. I did share it with my leadership team. I didn't try to carry the yoke with the barrels up the hill by myself. I brought some people around me, and it made a huge difference, and much more excited about what we've created through that process. But yeah, beforehand, it wasn't awesome, man. I didn't love it. That's okay, but it didn't feel okay at the time. Trauma plus time is hilarity often. When you look back, what a great time. It was not great at the time.
Yeah. I like a couple of things in there, especially that notion of presence. It becomes harder and harder as big society becomes busier and busier. And so noting that's an intentional piece there to be present, whether it's a conversation, whether it's looking at your culture, whether it's working with your team. And the other piece too there is being deliberate. So, with that self-awareness is great, but if you don't do anything with it, it's almost wasted energy. And so I love that, it's present, and now let's be deliberate. And when you do that deliberate together, it sounds to me like there was a certain amount of energy that was created. And now we hear things like, I love the culture that we have created. That's pretty cool.
There's no I, or there's no I in team and all those. I saw a meme the other day. It was like, stop the glamorization of busy. I really like that because do we glamorize? Oh my God, Jenny, I was already up today. I did 3 workouts. I did 2 presentations, and now it's only 8:00.
There you go.
We reward that and we prize that. And again, media pushes that to the next level for sure. Yeah. So much of my belief on leadership, I learned through watching TV, and I think I was led astray when I was younger.
The Hollywood hero.
You know what looks good on a TV show? A crazy over the top aggressive leader, because it's TV. But when you grow up, and when I was younger, there wasn't leadership training or leadership coaching that I was exposed to where I grew up. I grew up in a world, rural, like I mentioned earlier, where people kind of came together to get work done, which I look at now what I value, that accountability, that you couldn't look at a whole bunch of people doing harvest or doing something very, like, we all knew what the outcome needed to be. There was maybe someone who owned the farm or owned the equipment that would lead in some areas, but no one was ever the leader. It was that people worked together and took different directions at different times. And there was a high level of accountability. kind of baked into that environment. I just think historically how it operates of, man, we need to get work done because it's going to rain today. And if we don't get the harvest in, well, then we don't have food. And very different motivations of why people did what they did. No one ever called it leadership in looking back.
Yeah. And there's a lot we could take from that. Come together to get the work done. Anybody holding a meeting today, there's your mantra. Come together to get the work done. There we go. Boom.
Yeah. You've touched a lot on self-awareness today, Tyler. And again, I wasn't necessarily expecting that was something that was going to come up a lot. But how do you approach that? How do you approach self-awareness, self-development? Are you a resolutions? Do you make New Year's resolutions? You've chatted about, reading. And so, is that self-improvement or shelf improvement?
I've never heard that term, shelf improvement. That's awesome.
Right. So all these books that we keep on our shelves, I'm not poking fun, Jenny. But
there's more.
It's like as a leader who is being very intentional right now on your own leadership journey, how do you think about that, and how do you build that into your day or your week, or prioritize your leadership self-improvement?
Oh, what a great question. I'll throw it out there, and this is my own made up stat. I believe that my leadership success is 99% me, 1% the people I work with. And only because I had to put 1% to make the stat make sense, to make it make sense. So that for me has been a journey I've been on forever. It was not always a leadership journey. And it was always about like, if you look at the outcomes you're getting and they're not necessarily what you want them to be, or you believe they could be more, that's an indicator that it's, hey, you know what, might be you. And there's so many ways to do that. I've gone down the read every self-improvement book you can find, and go to this guru, and I use the word guru loosely, go to this workshop and that workshop, all about understanding self. What is it that triggers me to do what I do? Especially when it's an outcome that I'm like, if I could think about that outcome in advance, that's not the outcome I wanted. What was my reactivity? What was the emotional trigger? What was maybe the past trauma? And we're not going to get into that. What are we carrying around? I was joking, when's the last time you asked a 5-year-old for advice? Probably every day, because there's some belief structure that you took on at that point. And Jenny, you and I have gone down this rabbit hole on our podcast before around so much of what triggers me in my daily life now is a belief that I'm carrying around that's probably no longer serving me. So oftentimes, Greg, you meant about, as I'm exploring a little bit my leadership now, aside from myself, I'm like, who's my audience for this? Often I think about 38-year-old me. So that's a few years ago, maybe 11 years ago now, for anyone who's keeping score. And I was so hungry for it, but it was so much about, if I learn this skill, then I'll be good at that thing. But really what it was about was understanding what was triggering me or getting in my way to be the leader maybe I wanted to be, or an idealized, or get the outcomes that I hope for, or have the people around me react in a certain way that wasn't happening. And how could I get to that? The first easy one is to blame the people around you. There's a great, has anyone here read Extreme Ownership? Jocko Willenick. It's entertaining kind of Navy SEAL book, but he tells a story about two boats while they're doing BUDS training. This one boat's always winning. This one boat's always losing. The boat that's losing, the captain complained about his team. Oh, these guys can't row. They can't paddle. They're out in the surf getting yelled at, in this whole Navy SEAL environment. So they switched captains. And the boat that was winning came third, and the boat that was losing came first, because they switched the leader. And so much about that ownership of self, that's where I run into the self-improvement piece of like, I hope everyone around me is also pursuing that. I can't push that or force that, but being aware of what my style is and how it's impacting, and then unpacking that and going deeper. That's been a journey I've been on probably since my mid-20s, not necessarily calling it leadership growth, but growth of self, so that I can be a better leader. So I just threw a whole bunch of stuff at you with that one.
No, there's lots in there. And I think that the thing that comes back for me is you've been intentional about it. Like, I think so many people go down this, and again, that's why it becomes shelf improvement, right? You read the book and, oh, that was a good book, put it on the shelf, right? But did you do anything with it? And so what I really appreciate your thoughts around being intentional. And I think that is, I have no statistic to back this up, but I'm going to make one up. It's the minority of leaders versus the majority of leaders that are intentional about it. So.
Well, and I think too, it really speaks to, we hate to be uncomfortable. And Tyler, you said this earlier, there are times in your leadership we've had to sit in discomfort. Like, it is not cool. It doesn't feel good. And I had to smile when you were talking, like, I've not heard that, and I'm going to steal it probably. Like, when do we go to a 5-year-old for advice? Every single day. We get in our way with 5-year-old Jenny, 12-year-old Jenny. Like, 15-year-old Jenny is useless. My mum's on here, so she'd be laughing her head off right now. Because like, if I went there for advice, oh gosh, help us all. And so how do we make that switch? Like, just that awareness in that second, I want to, clear everything off the table and yell, okay, no, what is this version going to do right here, and where are we now? And I think if more leaders could even just a tiny bit do this piece and then go that way, we would have incredible outcomes. As you say, that it starts here.
And wanting to flip the table and having that emotion, try not to make it wrong, because that's where you can wrong yourself. But maybe don't act it out. Like, when are you, like, there's always that moment of realization. If you can get to close, you do something and then you go, oh, there's a point where that gets together, and then they almost happen like, okay, no, I'm not going to answer that way. Like, there is a degree of self. The only way to go through this journey is to kind of keep tabs. I read a book recently and they talk about James Fadiman, the Symphony of Selves, all the different selves that we have. And we live in this world where we're expected to be this one version of ourselves all the time. And it's from a single God concept, and it's evolved over history. It was quite interesting. But what I did, back to being intentional, Craig, and this, I do little quirky things like this. I said, okay, I took a sheet of paper, I literally put it on my desk, and I put detract or add. And every time I was in a meeting, I would identify the behavior that showed up that I felt either detracted from the meeting or the interaction with someone else, or added to it. And I tried to identify them as like, oh, that was my insecure self. That was I didn't want to look like I didn't know the answer self. That was I'm really collaborative and I'm open for anything self. And I started to fool around with it. And there was kind of a pattern. And most of it was fear, shame, not wanting to show up in those ways. I did it for about a month, and I just kept it. And I get out of a meeting, I'm like, okay, if that wasn't didn't go the way I wanted, what was it? Or if that went amazing. And that's one we often overlook. What made that go amazing? What made that awesome? Yeah. Like, it's easy to negative ourselves. Like, I'm going to improve all the broken things. There's a lot of things. If you're functioning in life, I would argue, hopefully 51% of things you do are awesome. Maybe 49% could be better. Like, but let's give ourselves the benefit there and celebrate them. And then I started to gradually get less on the left side and a little bit more on the right side. Because then I would get on the call and I would look and go, I'm going to be collaborative. I'm not scared to look like I don't know what I'm talking about self. And that self was way more fun in meetings. And I would say more productive for the people around me. But I did that for about a month, and it was a fun little exercise. Just, again, being intentional about, okay, I read this book. What do I do with this? Besides, hopefully being witty at a cocktail party, where else am I going to go with this book? And that was one of my tactics.
That's fantastic. We've kind of hit the point where we're closing in on the end, and we've got a couple rapid fire.
So soon.
I know, Tyler, we are going to have to do this again, because you've been a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate your openness and your candor and your vulnerability.
Thank you.
It's really been
fantastic. Love chatting with you guys. And anytime you pencil me in and tell me when it is, and I'll show up.
I appreciate that. So, what are the 3 non-negotiable behaviors that folks on your team must buy into?
Can I give you 5?
Sure.
Because this was a perfect, I could just do it, but there's permission with, I'm going to do it anyways. We switched a bunch of years ago to observable behaviors. Jenny knows my view on trustworthy and integrity and some of the values that we put up on a wall that are table stakes in an organization. So we relooked at it. We said, we're going to talk about things from observable behaviors, and we purposely don't define them for any new employees. We let them tell us what they think they mean. So be accountable, be resourceful, be helpful, be curious to learn, and speak up. Those are not only our values, those are observable behaviors, because we identify when things go well and things really, really work, what's going on, that's what's going on. And we purposely don't define them, because every single person knows what they mean. It's really funny. Even if they use their own words, it's pretty consistent. And when something slips, there's usually like, well, okay, like how was resourcefulness playing in here? Oh, I guess it didn't. Okay, great. Well, how would we do better next time? So those, I would say, are some of the non-negotiables that we aspire to every day. Do we hit them every day? Absolutely not. But it made our values on the wall a lot more pedestrian and a lot more usable than things you look at once a quarter at a leadership meeting or at a town hall.
Love it. What's the one piece of advice you would give to our audience about developing their leadership skills?
Take it outside of yourself. This is not a journey you should do alone. Peers, mentors, feedback, which self and have have some openness and have some grace with yourself, but get that feedback. And again, not all feedback is created equal. So get a lot of it and share it in different ways. But having someone in your life that you trust, I'm a huge advocate. I've always had coaches, mentors, friends that'll kick me in the ass, professional, like what is it? Was it, a coach is just a trained, what we used to call for a friend, they just have more training, which is okay. But have those people in your life. This is not a journey you should ever take. It's not a solo sport for sure. This is something that with the right people around you, one, it can make it a lot more enjoyable, and understand and give yourself some grace that if you're really going to lean into the areas that are maybe holding you back, it's going to be a bit messy and uncomfortable. It's better to take a friend with you.
Love that. Love it. and especially getting it from all different directions. That's a sound piece of advice there. So as we really move towards this close here, I love this idea. Where were you as a leader? Where are you as a leader? And where are you going next, Tyler? And we only have a minute for your answer.
Where was I?
Yeah.
I would call it toxic leadership, or like what I learned from Hollywood, command and control, watching too many movies growing up and going, well, that person's the leader and that's how they acted. I would say that's where I was. That's kind of sounds nasty, but it is true. When I first got my first leadership role, I wanted to buy one of those posters that was inspirational with people rowing and put it on the wall, because then I had a leadership office. So anyways, that's a whole nother thing. Where I am now is a lot more comfortable with self, which I believe is allowing me to become a better leader, and now turning into, well, what is my leadership philosophy, and unpacking it, knowing that and this is where curiosity is really playing a role in my life. So I'm exploring it. I'm taking it out for a walk. I'm theorizing it. I'm sharing it with friends so that they can give me feedback. Oh, what have you thought about this? So I'm in the middle of it right now. But the best part about this is I get to use it every day in practice. This isn't something I go into a lab and do. This is real life, 24/7 every day. And I slip up, but I catch it and I keep moving forward. In the future, being able to share that with people at a greater scale of like, hey, here's another way. The leadership has been done to death, but it's not even close. And the point of like, so many of us get elevated into positions of leadership or have opportunities to lead. And there's a difference there. Curiosity, I believe, is an incredible tool that's going to not only enrich in your life, it's going to enrich in the people around you if you use it from an additive perspective. How can I share that at a bit of a broader scale? It sounds like I'm legacy mapping now. That's not what it is. I just want to get it out there to the world, because I also learn by interacting. So that's where I'm going with it. And I see it only yielding higher returns for me and the people around me.
Brilliant.
Tyler, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. You shared some brilliant advice and some brilliant feedback, and I think I'll be re-listening to this episode for a while to come. So thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you so much
to the audience. Thanks. I see all the comments going at the bottom, which fits my ADD perfectly. So seeing people interact, I hope people got some benefit from it today. I hope somebody walks away with a value and a new thought of going, I wonder what I could do differently today. That would be cool.
I'm sure there'll be many. And Tyler, if people want to, where do we find you?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah.
Tyler@clearmotive.ca. Email me directly. That's fine. But also I'm on LinkedIn all the time. You can find me there. Collisions YYC. Check out They Just Get It. You can where you get your podcast, check them out there. But I'm on Instagram, Tyler Chisholm, but also LinkedIn is probably the best. I love LinkedIn. It's the one social media platform I feel hasn't jumped the shark, as they say. It still provides credibility. I don't feel dirty after I use it. So check me out, follow me on LinkedIn, and we got some great content that we put out on a regular basis. So if you want to tune in, but please reach out. If you haven't got it, I love talking to people. So anybody can reach out to me anytime. I'll have a chat.
That's fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much, Tyler.
Thank you both.
Jenny, as always, I appreciate you, Jenny. Thank you so much. And have yourselves a great Friday and a great weekend, everybody. Take care.
Thanks again, everyone. See you.